I'm so glad I got a problem solver with me.
It wouldn't be fair.
Well, I'm going to do a little bit of this anyway. I'm going to keep it brief so we have time for the lab. But when you look at the urinary system, we have the kidneys, and their main job is to make the pee, make urine, and that helps us to get rid of water and the metabolites that are sort of liquid that then keep our blood clean through that. The kidneys eliminate metabolic products. Those are protein breakdowns such as urea, or also toxic substances like medication. So when you look at medication, you're looking at the elimination of medication, which it often uses the pathway through the liver or through the kidney to get rid of its toxicity. So if you have kidney problems, you might not be able to take all the medications. So you've got to be careful about that. And those can be over the counter, like Advil and stuff like that. The kidneys maintain the electrolyte balance, concentration. It maintains the acid-base balance, and it maintains osmotic pressure of body fluids. By controlling the amount of liquid that's in the system and the amount of electrolytes we have as a concentration, that's what then controls the body fluid. Also, the kidneys do make things like bicarbonate ions, for example. And then it also regulates blood pressure and controls blood forming through hormones like the erythropoietin, for example. So that means the blood pressure is controlled depending on how much liquid we retain in the system. That controls blood pressure. Other way we can control blood pressure is by how tight the vessels are, the blood vessels. And the erythropoietin is a hormone that helps us make red blood cells. So that the erythropoietin codes for increases the production of red blood cells. When we look at structurally the overview of the kidneys, they are kidney bean shaped. Oh, there's the name, kidney bean. And they're retroperitoneal. That means they're outside of the protective membrane in the gut area, and they're in the back in the lumbar area around here, on either side of the spine. So we've got two of them. And the vessels that go in and out of the kidneys, they are medial. So if you see here on the X-ray, that's a lumbar. Oh, that's not it. That's the lumbar vertebra right here. You see that? That's another one down here. And that's the kidneys on the side, and those are the vessels. They come in and out medially, and we call the area where they go in and out the hilus. Another term that keeps coming over and over back to haunt us a little bit. Then on top of the kidneys, we have the adrenal gland. Right here, the adrenal gland sits on top of the kidney right here like a cap. And then surrounding, and we talked about the adrenal gland when we talked about the endocrine system. So you can look back up on that. And then surrounding the whole thing is a fatty capsule enclosed in a renal fascia. And the fatty capsule helps the kidney move somewhat around while they're well protected. And so the fat helps, is a pillow effect. It helps sort of the bouncing of the kidneys because they're retroperitoneal. We need that protection. If we have a starvation, shrinking that, and that increases the kidney's mobility, and then we have a problem with the water balance, and that's that kwashiorkor. We get the big belly in the children, and they're starving. So that's not a good sign. When we look at the function of the kidney, well, we got to, filter the blood basically. So we have it's basically a filtering system. So we have about 1,700 liters or quarts a day passing by the kidney, or blood passing by the kidney. So they pass by all these little things. So the blood comes in and then it goes into these little capsule-looking things. And inside there, we filter the blood. So most blood plasma with dissolved substances is filtered. We do that is about 170 quarts a day. It's a lot of filtrate. So then it's called filtrate. Once it's filtered out of the blood, so it goes from the blood into these tubules. Actually, no, it goes from the blood into here, into this tubule system here. Long tubular system. And that whole system here is called the nephron. So the term nephron means it's a functional unit of the kidney. So when you look at the kidney on this plaque, which of course we didn't put out there, the plaques right there, if you want to grab one, definitely for the lab. This is one kidney. These little dots are the same dots as here. And that's one dot. That's one dot. So all around the kidneys, we got these little filters. These are little filters. They're actually, when you're going to break it down, they're the glomerulus is a capillary. So the blood comes from the kidney, the renal artery diverts off, has not multiple layers downward until it reaches this place. But then in here, you have capillaries go around it. This here is the glomerulus. There's a capillary tuft. And you see that here. That's the red stuff. Those are capillaries. The capillaries are very leaky. And so they just want to leak all the fluid, everything in. But what happens, what's on top of the capillaries, on this side here, you see this brownish type or yellowish type stuff on top of it with these slits. These are cells that line the capillaries, and they call them podocytes. They have like feet, they interlock and make a filter that creates slits. And then anything that goes through these slits creates the filtrate. Everything that's too big stays back. And that's what stays back is a lot of the proteins. The bigger stuff stays back. So it's a physical stuff. It's like a coffee filter. What's small enough goes through, what's not small enough does not go through. And so we get about 170 quarts a day that goes through, and then it goes into this long tubular system that wiggles around here, and then it goes down deep, and then it comes back up, it wiggles around here more, and then it goes down deep, and then you pee out. Then you make pee. So that's how we make pee. And so when you look at the kidney here, you have this round structure. These little dots are on the top layer, on the shell, and the deep going down that goes, this loop that goes down here before it comes back up and wiggles some more, that goes deep towards the center of the kidney. And so you end up having a part that's more whitish looking or lighter looking and a part that's darker looking. All right? And so once that filtrate, you're not going to pee 170 quarts. That's a lot of peeing. So thank God. Unless you drink a lot of coffee maybe, and then alcohol at night or something like that. But that filtrate that's made then basically gets all put back into the bloodstream, and these lines here, these are capillaries that wiggle around all these tubes that can absorb the liquid back into the bloodstream. And that way we clean the system, we clean the blood. So it's pretty neat stuff. So let's see, what did I miss? I miss that each kidney has about 1.2 million of these little dots. So that's a lot of dots. And we talk about it starts as a renal corpuscle. The renal corpuscle is the term that's used for that whole thing. The glomerulus is the capillary, and then the structure around it, that's like a cup. That then is it's almost like a funnel cup. The part on the outside that funnels into this tubular structure, and on the inside we have these podocytes that are sort of, it's like the serous membrane system. We have a visceral layer and the parietal layer. It's like the outside is the parietal layer typo, and what's clunging around the capillaries is the visceral layer. And once we're going through that, then we're in the system of these wiggly lines. And that's down in here. That's then the filtrate. And so the outside shell is known as the Bowman's capsule. I don't think you need to know that for this class test, but there it is. you will in another class. You don't need to know that. And then look at that. We have then the tubular system. Let me see. That's probably on the next slide. Yeah, the tubular system is here. So this is then that glomerulus, and then a capsule, and then we have these first twiggly lines. We call that the proximal convoluted tubule. There's a slide that says that. See, proximal and then distal convoluted tubules. So the first section is the proximal. Proximal means, you know, closer to the body attachment, and distal means further away. So then we have the proximal right after the glomerulus, and then it goes deep down into the kidney, and then it comes back up, and then afterwards we call it the distal convoluted tubule. And the thing that goes deep down, I might as well just name it now, we call that the Loop of Henle. The Loop of Henle. Well, let me backtrack because I went a little fast here. So once we make that filtrate, in the most substances, do I write where? No. So we make the filtrate, that's the red here. So that's from blood to the tubules. And then pretty much all of it, 99% of the water has to be reabsorbed back into the blood. And this line here is called the peritubular capillary. On the other slide, it was indicated with all these loops because it looks much more like that than just one line. But to make a schematic out of it, that makes it easier. So reabsorption is the green arrow here. Most of the substances go back into it. Most of the places that happens is here in the proximal convoluted tubule, and then in that loop of Henle where it goes down. But then we have a third thing, and the third thing is some substances do not get squeezed into the filtrate, but we want to get rid of them. And so we have some that get secreted from the blood into the tubule, and then we can pee it out. All right, so that process from making filtrate, from reabsorption, and then secretion ultimately creates the pee down in here. And the pee gets, once we get through these tubule systems, we go to one big line that goes all the way down to the center of the kidney, and we call that the collecting duct. It collects all the pee, basically. And that's right here, collecting duct. And then from the collecting duct, we go into these funnel-looking things. They have names. They call them calyces. I don't think I've written that one down. It's probably on one of the pictures. These funnels. A funnel is a calyx. One of them is a calyx. Like that. I hope that's how that's pronounced. And then when they all come together, they form what we call the renal pelvis. So down in here, that's the renal pelvis. And then from there, it gets out of the kidney, goes to behind the bladder, and comes in behind the bladder on the bottom. And then and that's called the ureter. And then from the bladder, we pee it out, and that's called the urethra. So then we have kidney, ureter, bladder, urethra. And then goodbye. Well, to pee or not to pee, that's pretty important, right? Although I have to say, I definitely like this a lot, the Hello Kitty. Where are we? Now we're here. So I did this slide already a little bit. So I talked briefly about these two areas in the kidney. The one that's the outside, that's a little lighter, and then the inside. The outside is known as the cortex. But that's a word that comes back over and over too. So the cortex is the lighter stuff. The cortex is where we're going to have the glomerulus, the Bowman's capsule, and the proximal convoluted tubule, and then the distal convoluted tubule. And then deep going inside, down into the red area, that's called the medulla. And the deeper structure is one of those words that comes back a lot. There's medulla. That deep loop between the PCG and the DCG is called the Loop of Henle, right in here. I don't know why I call it Loop of Henle, but I always thought it was Stone Henle, but then I realized that wasn't it. And then I realized nobody knows who that is anymore now. So the medulla is on the inside, and the cortex is on the outside. And then when you look further into the medulla, you see these structures here. Because what actually happens is, and when you actually make a 3D out of these, there's one thing that shows it nicely. I don't have it though. But you can see it sort of in here. These are called pyramids. So these red structures, they're like inverted triangles, but they're really three-dimensional. They're inverted pyramids, so to speak. So they call them renal pyramids. So I have like 10 or 12 in each side that make then the medulla. And the apices form in, oh look here, it's the word calyces. That's the funnel. So the papilla goes into the calyces, and then it goes into the renal pelvis before it goes bye-bye. But you have these pyramids arranged, so in between the pyramids you have a space for the blood vessel. See the red blood vessel coming here, that's the artery. In the organs like that, away from the heart, the red will be the artery and the blue will be the vein. And so that's easy there. But you see how the artery comes up in between those pyramids, there's a little space, and then it goes around it, and from there it goes to all the glomeruli around, these 1.2 million glomeruli per kidney. And that's a lot of filtering. Lots of filtering. And look, that's right here. So the renal artery, you see the word renal, you think kidney. Renal artery channels the blood through the hilus, that's the port where we come in, into the kidney. From there, then it divides into interlobar arteries that go up between, and then they call them arcuate, and then they go all into the glomerulus through the interlobular arteries. You don't need to know all that. I mean, you do, but you know, it's a chain of events. You just look it up. Don't think of memorizing that for this class. I want you to be able to look it up. Yeah, keep the booklets if you may. And then when we get to the arteriole, the smallest vessel that brings the blood into the glomerulus, we call that the afferent arterioles, like the incoming. It's like the afferent nerves going into the brain. And then the one that comes out after the glomerulus is known as the efferent arteriole, like an exit. And then from there, the blood goes and hangs around, makes a meshwork sort of, that hangs around that loop of Henle going deep into the medulla. And we call that the vasa recta. And that picks up all that fluid again, basically, and lets some be secreted. And then from there, we're going to get into the interlobular vein, the arcuate vein, the interlobar vein, the renal vein, and bye-bye, renal cave. A lot of times, the arteries versus the vein is just the backwards channel. So you study one, then you assume the other one is the same except for the exceptions, and then you memorize the exceptions. That's how I studied a lot of the stuff. It's like, does it make sense? Yes, okay, I'll keep making sense. Making sense. Does it not make sense? I have to study that, because then I have to change my thinking about it. Yeah, try to be least effort, the lazy approach. Oh yeah, and here I just pointed to them, so you can see them. And then I already explained this sort of thing here, which is how we have the renal corpuscle. Let me just read it. Have each capillary of the glomerulus is surrounded by podocytes. These are these yellow finger-like things. And that's then an inner visceral layer of the Bowman's capsule. That's the whole capsule. And together with the basal membrane, a glomerular filtration barrier. That's this right here, called the barrier, the slits. That's the slits. We have about a square meter of that in the body. I'm not sure if it's in each kidney or it's in the body. I think it's in each kidney. And so it sizes which particles are small enough that it can go through, and which particles are big enough that small enough that it can go through, and which ones are too big to go through. They stay behind in the blood. The glomerular filtration rate. It measures the volume of fluid that is filtered from the glomerular capillaries into the Bowman's capsule per minute. It's normally about 125 milliliters per minute in total. So it helps us understand kidney function, measuring that. It's a passive process. That filtration creation is a passive process, and it depends on the blood pressure, like how forceful is the blood pushed into the Bowman's capsule. And then, of course, the glomerular filtration rate, surface also, how big is the surface that it works, how is the workable functional surface. And then that is the blood pressure in the glomerulus itself is actually created by having the afferent arteriole be larger than the efferent arteriole that feeds away. So more blood wants to flow in and less wants to go out. So you're flooding the capillaries, the glomerulus with that. Opposing that, and that's the blood pressure, that's the hydrostatic pressure. And opposing that, we have osmotic pressures. We have a blood osmotic pull of the blood proteins that are remaining inside the capillaries that want to bring the liquid back in. That's kind of like back to the, it's a little weird, but it still is back to the salt on the tomato. It wants to pull in. These large molecules want to pull it back in. It's not really a big force. Well, it is about 30 millimeters of mercury here. And then we also have a capillary hydrostatic pressure within the Bowman's capsule that if it pushes too much blood coming out, it wants to push against it, and that also is opposing force. So that gets pretty detailed, but you can look it back up when you have to study those dynamics. That's more a physiology question. Those kidney dynamics. Oh boy. All right, let's do that. That's last few slides. So now we want to, when we go from the filtrates, from getting all the blood squeezed out, that 170 liters a day, to the urine, we have that reabsorption process. And the reabsorption process is a very good example how active and passive processes can work closely together. Because what we're going to do is when we have, well, a lot of the liquid goes back into the blood up in here, the proximal tubule, but as we reach down into the loop of Henle, we have sodium-potassium pumps and sodium again pulls water with it. So you're always thinking, that's salt, and that pulled water. They're located in the basement membrane of the tubules, epithelial cells that transport blood. Wait, let me read that again. Hold on. Sodium potassium pumps are located in the basement membrane of the tubules epithelial cells, and they actively transport sodium back into the bloodstream, and with it follows water. So when you look at that, you have those located. A lot of them located right here. You have them located right here in the arm that comes back up, not the arm that goes down. And so you squeeze all the sodium out, and you make this area very, very saline solutiony, very salty. So the further down you're going to go into this tube, into the medulla, the salter you're going to get. And that salt passively pulls water out of the tubules all over the place and squeezes all that water out. So it's kind of like when you feel really dehydrated, it's that kind of process. To maintain the body's own sodium concentration, we excrete all salt eaten via the urine. That's just another factoid here. Not 90% of salt and 60-70% of water are reabsorbed within the first section, and then the second section to about here. So most of the water is absorbed in the early parts, and the salt's important in the early parts, and then the latter part is fine-tuning, like anti-pee hormone stuff, like when you drink coffee or alcohol, you gotta go pee, that happens here. All that is happening in here. And that first part of the process, this just happens. And then in the latter part, we fine-tune what's happening. So that's why the ADH is in there, the antidiuretic hormone. So fine-tuning of the sodium balance, and then of course the water takes mainly place in the distal convoluted tubule, that's distal convoluted tubule. And there we have aldosterone with the aid of renin. That's a hormone connection that I think I do have one quick slide on it. What aldosterone you want to associate with it promotes sodium reabsorption in the last part, in the distal convoluted tubule. So that's important because then when the sodium is reabsorbed, water will follow. So you can pull more water out of the filtrate by having this aldosterone present. This I've just touched on really briefly to give us the intricacy of the systems. It's the Renin-Angiotensin-Aldosterone Mechanism. So you have an area in the kidneys called the juxtaglomerular area. That's right here. It's just right in each glomerulus. In an area you have some sensory cells. And that picks up systemic and local blood pressure fluctuations, and it responds to that. And when blood pressure falls, renin is secreting, and the cascade goes down. The cascade meaning just renin stimulates angiotensin II, and that is a vasoconstrictor. So now, if the blood pressure falls, you have a system that constricts the vessels to raise up the blood pressure, because the less volume in all the tubes you have, with the same amount of liquid, the more pressure you're going to have. And so that's what that does. And it helps us drink more. It's a thirst creator. And then it secretes the aldosterone, it activates the aldosterone, and we just learned that the aldosterone brings the salt back into the bloodstream, so it brings the water with it. So we raise the volume of water, of liquid. So now we attack the blood pressure drop by squeezing the blood vessels to make less space, and we increase the amount of blood we have to also bring the blood pressure up. So that's pretty nifty. I mean, of course, most of us have to worry about having too high blood pressure, but it's that in reverse. Then we also have then the ADH. That's a very big determinant, because that opens aquaporins directly. Aquaporins are pores that just let the water go out of the collecting duct back into the bloodstream. So if antidiuretic hormone is present, you get the blood going in, you get the liquid going into the bloodstream. If the anti-pee hormone is not present, you will pee. And that happens when you drink a coffee. Just drink some coffee and drink a lot of water, and then you go pee all the time for like a few hours. And that's exactly when you feel how that works. And so the ADH, the antidiuretic hormone, works directly on water pores, whereas the aldosterone works on salt. It took me a while to figure that one out. I'm a little slow in these things, but that way I can hopefully tell them to you. As osmotically active particles, sodium in plasma rises, osmoreceptor in the hypothalamus stimulate the ADH release from the posterior pituitary. Look at that, how fine-tuned that stuff is. So that is, you have the hypothalamus right back in when it comes to peeing. I mean, this is you don't have to learn this. This is to show you how intricate it is, if it's a little too much. Well, I love that stuff. And then we got the urinary tract, and that we already talked about that. The ureter goes from the kidneys to the bladder. It enters in the back. They're called urinary orifices. And then we have the bladder, and the bladder lies down deep in the pelvis. The ones who came to the cadaver, we saw that. It's right behind the pubic bone. there was a case that we had when I was interning with my mentor, Rob. And this lady needed to go pee every 15 minutes. And it's like, it destroyed her life. And she, in her history, she was, as a kid, she was smacked by a truck. Her pelvis was way off. Once the pubic bone was not like one almost over the other, like it's about this thick, and it goes off when the thing is shifted, then it pushes on the bladder, irritates the bladder. Once that was level, now she's normal. Or at least back then that was the case. But so that was interesting to observe that. That was one of my learnings. And then below here, in the urinary bladder, we have the exit that goes to the urethra, and then we pee it out. This area here makes a triangle, and it's known as the trigone. The trigone lies between the two ureteric orifices and the urethra. What else do I need to say about this? The bladder is a muscular, smooth muscle organ. Well, we know about that when we go pee. And it has epithelial tissue. It's lined as epithelial. That's transitional epithelial tissue. So the bladder can grow and get bigger and get smaller. And the tissue follows it. So it can transition from a flat cell to from a cube cell to a flat cell, depending on how much stretch we have. Remember these cell types in the epithelial tissue? Like the flat cells, the cube cells, those things. And those cells here, they just change shape. In the skin, they don't change shape. Oh, good, look at that. That's all I have to say was the urinary system. And now I want to see if you have any questions. Was that pretty clear? Fast and furious, huh? Faster than digestion.